So maybe he want to make sure his presidency is secure, succession plan is secure, so he passed the law before the parliament.
Hello, and welcome to episode 63 of What's Happening in Myanmar, a fortnightly show from the Frontier Myanmar podcast family. I'm your host, Luke Corbin. It's Friday, February 6. It's been a big 2 weeks, with the third phase of the military's election concluding, and more details being announced about the new post-election regime. We'll be joined later by Amara Thiha, who is a non-resident fellow with the China program at the Stimson Center. Amara will join us to talk through what it means and the crucial role that China has played in institutionalizing fragmentation in Myanmar. But first, I want to apologise for skipping a week of this show without warning the listeners. The funding environment for Myanmar media has been challenging this past year, and that's come home to bite in Frontier, just like many other organisations. You can hear more about those challenges, actually, by listening back to episode 59 of the show. That was at the start of this year. There's an interview there with Frontier's Editor-in-Chief, Tutu Aung, and independent journalist, Lorcan Lovett. So from now on, Frontier's podcasts, that's Do At Than and What's Happening in Myanmar, they'll be running on a reduced schedule. This show will be every second weekend, every fortnight going through 2026. I hope you still remember to check in with us bi-weekly. Now, on to the news as usual. I know a bi-weekly news roundup is a little bit less crucial or helpful than when it's a weekly show, but I'll still aim every episode to quickly wrap some of the most important developments over the fortnight. Let's get into it. So first, we have to start with conflict. It has continued raging over the last 2 weeks, including on February 1st, the 5th anniversary of the military's 2021 coup. On that day, many peaceful protests were held in Myanmar and abroad. Now, during this conflict, the majority of the casualties were, as usual, victims of military airstrikes, artillery and drone attacks. The military targeted funeral homes, hospitals, schools, camps for displaced people, community events like wedding donation drives, and administration offices for resistance groups. At least 40 civilians were killed by the military in the last 2 weeks, including children, and at least 30 were injured. A recent Amnesty International report says that the military regime imports jet fuel for its airstrikes by transporting it on ships that turn off their location tracking to avoid detection. The human rights group said that 2 US-sanctioned vessels have been shipping jet fuel to Myanmar from Iran since July 2024, and that the Myanmar Port Authority shows 109,604 tonnes of aviation fuel were imported into the country last year. That's the highest for any year since the 2021 coup. The United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights claims that at least 170 civilians were killed in 408 airstrikes during the election period of the 6 weeks from December 28 to January 25. So while there has been fighting back and forth and little exchanges of territory over the last 2 weeks, it's most important to understand that airstrikes enabled by this jet fuel is what's causing the most suffering for people in Myanmar. And second, yes, those military elections are now officially concluded, with the third and final round of voting held in 61 townships on Sunday, January 25. Overall, these elections were pre-designed by the military to deliver a military proxy party victory. That's the Union Solidarity and Development Party, the USDP. And the elections have delivered, with overwhelming USDP victories in both upper and lower houses. While these elections were supposedly national in character, voting was only held in limited locations and many sites were disturbed by active conflict as resistance groups sought to disrupt the process, especially in phases 2 and 3. Even so, China praised the military's elections in public multiple times. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, however, is still yet to recognise them. There's been a lot of speculation about what kind of post-election regime would be configured, and we're now a little closer to understanding that. This week, the military enacted the Union Advisory Council Law. This new legislation empowers the president to form a council that will take a, quote, advisory and coordination role on the new Myanmar government's, quote, security and rule of law, international relations, peace and legislative agendas. This law also says the president will issue instructions on additional roles and responsibilities of the council, and the council will consist of at least 5 people, including a chair and secretary. It'll have a term of 5 years, the same as a president does. While the military hasn't said who will be appointed to the council yet, it's possible, maybe likely, that it will be chaired by coup leader Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, who is of course also a member of the current National Defence and Security Council, which does a similar thing. Now, this is the right time to bring in Amara Thiha, our special guest for this episode. He has been involved in politics and analysis of politics in Myanmar for over a decade. He's currently with the Stimson Center. He recently published How China Carved Up Myanmar, Beijing's Strategy to Create Stability Through Dependence in Foreign Affairs magazine. He's here to give us a realist perspective on China's influence in Myanmar. So, hello, Amara.
Thank you, Kotanzin. Thanks for hosting me.
So getting straight into it, before we bring up China, what's your view on the new Union Advisory Council law and Min Aung Hlaing's ambitions?
I personally think that is for Min Aung Hlaing to become a president. So that council will accommodate the military senior officials who do not part of the election and who are not sure to retire. So this council is going to bridge between the presidential mandate and the military. So according to the constitution, the executive and the parliament cannot oversee the military. So when Min Aung Hlaing becomes the president, he needs some form of arrangement that he can continuation until the new successor is in place, and that is a safeguarding himself. So this is a kind of arrangement trying to create the coordination between the president office and the military at some point. And you can ask, what is the difference with the National Defense and Security Council? The difference is, this is a permanent bodies, and the other one is the meeting. And what interesting for me is not about the council. This kind of committee and councilship have been discussed for more than a year. What interesting part is why Min Aung Hlaing just created and enacted this law just only 6 weeks before the first section of parliament, right? So usually this kind of law can easily pass in this condition because USDP win more than 90%. It just need about few weeks to wait until the parliament passed the law. But he did it before it. And this is the first time in Myanmar history that the bigger law or the mother law is created with the parliament while the parliament is in place during the interim arrangement. So this kind of law has been done when in Tan Shui administration. But during the Tan Shui administration, there is no parliament. So he did it and then he moving on. And during the 1962 and 74, Ne Win do not change the major law, but he used different kind of directive. So my assessment is there may be some form of uncomfortability, or maybe he is not very comfortable about USDP win the majority seat in there, and he want to make sure every step is secure until the presidency. This is my assessment out there.
Okay, so do you mean that if the USDP had won less seats, if there was less turnout, or if they were allocated less seats in these elections, then maybe Min Aung Hlaing would have actually waited until Parliament was formed? He would have been confident to enact this law at that time, and that it's noteworthy that he didn't.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, because no one is expected to win this level of majority out there. USDP even win more seats than in 2010 election, even though we say 2010 election is the most rigged election ever for past 3 decades. But now USDP win more than this. And of course, the voter turnout is low, but the votes are more or less, clean. So because the USDP members, the core supporter, almost all of them come out and vote. And apart from that, no one is going to vote. This creates USDP as a strong, at least strong legitimacy out there. So maybe he want to make make sure his presidency is secure, succession plan is secure. So he passed a law before the parliament. Aung San Suu Kyi did the same thing with the state councillor law, but the difference is Aung San Suu Kyi that time passed the law after the parliament. And another interesting part is, Aung San Suu Kyi have a clear control over her party and also have a clear charismatic legitimacy out there. But we are not sure that Min Aung Hlaing is whether he is confident enough to go on, like in 2016.
That's really interesting insight. Thanks. Now, these elections, they've not been a step towards democracy by any standard. But even in these conditions, with a proxy party placed in power, it's interesting Min Aung Hlaing still feels like he needs to do this. Now, I first contacted you to talk about your writing on China, which is always clear and helpful, and listeners can see your work in the show notes for this episode. So let me ask you the sort of broad, simple question. Why is China so happy with these military elections? They've issued such effusive praise for them again and again, much more than any other country or observer. I would say that China's spokespeople have actually spoken more positively about these elections than even Min Aung Hlaing, you could argue. Why? Why is this? What does China get out of these new arrangements?
So to understand why China's praise on the election, we have to look the other side of the story, right? A lot of news headlines are citing it's a sham election. And then, that is valid, to be honest. But the stakeholder inside Myanmar, including USDP and other political parties, consider this is a kind of big push, right? They have been big push for elections since 2022, and they believe that that is the only way to claw back for some form of governance with the constitution. But China isn't delusional just to going on, right? They knew that this election won't bring a sudden democratic transition, but they make a cold assessment. They already made it. The conflict isn't ending soon, and there is no dialogue with this administration on the horizon. So through supporting the election, China is betting on that a constitutional administration, even a flawed one, it can function better than the pure military junta style. So what the government can sign, a trade, secure a border, pick up the call, that is what China needed. And for China, a stabilized regime that's moved from the emergency rule to the constitutional phase, they consider it as an exit ramp from the past 5 years of nightmare. So they think more, predictable administration as an exit ramp. That is what China is expected, and what is this China is pushing it for.
Right. So China thinks these elections will result in a more predictable administration, but you don't mean a necessarily more empowered one or a more capable one. You've actually written that China is institutionalizing fragmentation in Myanmar, that Chinese leaders believe that fragmentation of Myanmar can be in their own national interest. Why would China do this? What do you mean by institutionalizing fragmentation in Myanmar?
So China, let me clarify the first thing, right? The China didn't create the fragmentation in Myanmar. This become a fragmentation already. But they have decided to live along it and trying to formalize the way they engage in this form of institutional fragmentations of the state. So this is what I call it, institutionalized fragmentation. And because when you engage in this kind of fragmentation as a functioning mechanism, you somehow at some point create the hedging away from the risk. At the same time, you somehow deepen more into this kind of fragmentation. So the reality on the ground is the central government no longer has a monopoly of power. We all knew it. So instead of waiting who is a winner, that may not really come. China is creating the institutional arrangement that walks within this kind of chaos. So what they are making is they are making a deals with the ethnic groups on the border and the military in the center. And because China consider power vacuum as a greatest security threat. So when they're trying to create the institutionalized relationship within that fragmentation, the vacuums can be easily filled with a different form of engagement rather than the crimes and the Western influence and scam center. So this is kind of a hedging policy, and they try to make it more functioning mechanism out there. So that is creating a surviving modality of the fragmented reality. So when I say about institutional fragmentation is there, for the hedging policy, they impose certain form of mechanism that going to work for upcoming about a decade or so that have a two different outcome. One is to survive. That is going to be work. Another one is that will also entrench this fragmentation, and at some point they may become institutionalized on this. So this is what I call institutionalized fragmentation.
Okay, that's a good explanation there. I want to ask you a follow-up. How does this actually work, though? Like, it's really easy to throw around when you're doing international relations speak. China wants this, or Thailand does that. But who in China actually wants what, and how do these people in China do it? There's different organs of power, right? In China, we have the party, we have the military, we have national, subnational, the Yunnan province, different levels of power. How do they all coordinate on Myanmar policy to do this?
Thank you. Usually people talk about China as a one big entity and they try to do most thing, right? I mean, in reality, it's not on it. I mean, between the party, the military, BLA, and the government, the state council, they have the different way of mandate and different way of engaging in there. For example, because of the military junta is there, the PLA is on the front line engaging with the junta until the state administration is getting in touch in the first few years. And Ministry of State Security, MSS, has long-term engagement with the non-state actors in the border because they are the only one who got mandate to do. But we have a new actor like the public security, the police. They come into because of this Stimson Center issue. And of course, with the foreign affairs and party engagement, they have a multiple channel out there and they coordinate it. And they come up to the Politburo with a different form of assessment and different form of recommendation. And the Politburo decided and moving it on. This is how sometimes they coordinate it, sometimes they are competing, but they are trying to get attention from the center leadership. This is how they compete and coordinate it. But what is the most important and interesting tension is what I usually say is Beijing and Yunnan. When I say it's a Beijing principle and then Yunnan's epistemology or Yunnan's knowledge. So what usually Beijing have is a kind of principle level, long-term strategy, and giving a mandate to pushing it on. But what's matter to implement on the ground and how to do it is led by the Yunnan, because they have a long-term engagement with Myanmar. So they have a knowledge how to do and know-how. And this is how we consider kind of, coordination and, the complexity of negotiation out there. So you have a agency part and also geographical part, and they are coordinated. And the one interesting part is, when China make policy, they make an assessment very fast. They make a policy fast and then they implement. If something wrong, they can easily revert it back and they just, go on. So what China way of leadership is more like an engineering mindset, not a legal mindset. They think we can just, if not walk, we can try another way. This is how they do it. So you can see the Chinese policy is, quite fast and looking for the efficiency.
Thanks, Amara, and you've nodded there to Dan Wang's influential book about China from last year called Breakneck. I recommend it. Now, when this policy is being enacted by China, how do decision makers view the border-based actors like the UWSA, the MNDAA? These are groups that use Chinese currency. They're completely reliant on China to survive, to thrive, control their areas, which on the map, their areas are in Myanmar. Does China see the MNDAA, for an example, as an extension of its state? The Kokang people speak Chinese. They used to pay tribute to China historically, for example. Or is their independence what's crucial to understanding this part of Myanmar?
So put it in that way, that is also it's a long-term discussion, not with the MNDAA. There's a lot of, discussion on the UWSA before, and even before what about the BCP, and then even before about the different warlords era time in Yunnan, right? So this kind of relationship is always there because the area that China and Myanmar border is not always under the one domain, and both Beijing or Naypyidaw cannot control that area for very long. So they have a certain form of autonomy to engage and play along with it to extend the autonomy out there. So I think at some point, of course, China nowadays, a lot more powerful and they can reach the border. So they can use more leverage and out there than decades before. But in reality, they have a very difficult relationship with these EROs too. So this is another reality they are facing it off. Yeah.
Okay, returning to the recently concluded elections and this new law, how deeply does China care about what happens next with this new council, or with the position that Min Aung Hlaing takes in the new military-designed civilian government this year? Like, for China, is it already mission accomplished, or is there more that they want to arrange?
I mean, just put in a simple way. I mean, China doesn't have a man in Myanmar, right? They are looking just for the requirement for the stability. They want something that person within the constitutional framework, regardless of who is it, and then that can bring stability. I mean, if you're looking back to the NLD administration, the China and Myanmar relation at the peak during the NLD administration, that is in one of the facts. And this proof China is not about the authoritarian fun club thing. There's a matter of who can bring the efficiency, who can work with them. They want someone that is capable administration, that can solve the problem. And crucially, of course, that problem solving is good if they are keeping the West away from the back door. What I mentioned, of course, the state of Burma can work with the West, but don't bring these Western guys along the Yunnan border. So when they give a green light on Min Aung Hlaing, it's not about picking a favorite. It's about ensuring the next leader is someone who can maintain the stability, at least in the transition phase, and then they are looking forward for someone who come after to moving it on more like a stable one. And of course, the central administration of Myanmar already make a guarantee that they will move along with the Chinese priority. So that's why the secession and all these picking peoples are coming in. It's focused mainly on the capable stability person.
Okay, I think you've broken down how institutionalizing fragmentation can benefit and works for China, and this tension between having stability but also disorder. But it's hard to see how any of that actually benefits Myanmar, the people of Myanmar, definitely not the pro-democratic forces in Myanmar. If we think about the Spring Revolution, most resistance groups that oppose military rule, they're actually very careful not to call out China directly for its influence in sustaining military rule. That's still the case, even after China forced the TNLA and the MNDAA ceasefires. It pressured the UWSA, sold drones to the military, pushed for these so-called elections. When resistance groups have so many difficulties agreeing on anything political beyond merely ending military rule, they actually have a shared pragmatism about China's power. That is one rare point of unity. But I want to ask whether you think that could change. Could some resistance groups actually threaten Chinese interests more assertively? And what are the red lines for China when it comes to these groups that resist military rule in Myanmar?
The two part, right? I mean, one part is about the geographical, constraint, and the second part is about, how China is more powerful these days, right? So if you can see it, after the 1027, northern groups are one of the most efficient and one of the only capable military campaigns out there. So a lot of persons are saying that this is not support from China. Some people say this is already there. But what we have to know is without the streamline of supplies and years of preparation, this kind of operation in this large scale cannot be happen. You cannot see that level of operation in southern Burma, right? So as soon as when China blocked the border and the whole operation collapsed simply within a few months. So this is what they can capable of, right? So and another part is as soon if the China really getting in on the security perspective, and they can easily turn off the largest armed groups in UWSA and MNDAA. So everyone is trying to play along with it, because imagine you can probably see the conflict trend, right? As when UWSA start to mention and make an announcement that don't come and ask the weapons and supply from me because we cannot no longer support you, and you can see that the intensity of conflict is significantly reduced. So this is how dependency are there, because the southern border they do not have that level of coordination, the availability of supply, and so on. So no matter what, you still need to rely on. There's a broader market and broader resources out there. So I think that's the one major reason out there. Second one is more clear that China have a more, how can I say, they have a different way of engaging the different levels. So they have to make it sure that each non-state actors have a constant engagement, and they have walking it on since the beginning of the coup, or even before that.
And going a bit further with the revolution and China dynamics here, and a more powerful China that you talk about. Well, the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Republic of China, they were born out of revolution. China does get involved in other countries' internal affairs all the time, but it hasn't publicly influenced regime change or revolution abroad for decades. That their policy seems to be to always just pull back, never go that far, never go as far or as quick as the United States or Russia has recently done, for example. But still, could China ever more fully support, if not this spring revolution, maybe a new future revolution in Myanmar? Do resistance groups who have long fought against military rule in the country have any agency at all to work in that direction to get Chinese support, more Chinese support?
I mean, historically, China never supported the regime change, not only in Myanmar, and they never getting involved in the regime change process, right? I mean, the way of exporting revolution is end since 1978, 79. So since then, Chinese leadership called to the Communist Party chairman and to Beijing, and then they say, you should start going on yourself. So that was since 1980s, and then after 10 years, a Communist Party, collapsed. So this is not the Chinese way of engaging anymore. And another part is, so if you're looking on the ideological perspective, right? I mean, of course, China coming from the revolutionary approach. But before that, you have to realize that China also gone through the about 30 years of warlord era. So they are making assessment on Myanmar as a warlord era, and they consider all of these groups are more or less like a warlords based on certain interests. And there is no clear politically strong, revolutionary vanguards coming out on this process. Everyone is even not coordinated. So they are waiting for about a year or two to start to engage who can be the person and where they can, engage with them. But the problem is now after 5 years, we do not have a single unified command or at least a revolutionary vanguard coming out of this. I think 5 years is more than enough for the, to make an assessment out there, right? So I think the chance of supporting and going on regime change is never going to be happen. This is what I believe, right? I mean, because, China never come in this kind of situation on the ground.
Okay, turning to other nations, China has the influence that it does because it has the border with Myanmar. It abuts Myanmar, right? But other countries do too. Thailand has a huge land border with Myanmar, and Thailand has an election soon. Thailand benefits from millions of cheap Burmese migrant workers doing the dirty and dangerous jobs in the Thai economy. Thailand benefits from huge capital inflows as Burmese people park their cash in Thai condominiums and businesses. But Thailand also has to deal with the militarized border, the ongoing fallout of the scam industry in Myanmar, and other consequences of being a neighbour. Now, Thailand could play a more assertive role in post-coup Myanmar, but it's been quite reactive rather than proactive since 2021. Is Thailand just too busy with its own political crises to play a more meaningful role? What can we actually expect from Thailand on Myanmar policy after, say, these new upcoming imminent elections?
You're right. So, there are three major issues, right? I mean, the first issue is, Thailand have their own political crisis. I mean, since 2021, probably, I think it's already 3 times the regime is, administration will change and there is an election. So they cannot easily create the, the policy on Myanmar and how to deal with it. It's not an easy task because they need a lot of bargaining out there. That's the one part. The second part is, the border security part, right? I mean, China do not allow anyone to cross the border to China. And they have a very strong fencing system, and then they do not allow anything around the border. But it's a very different from Thailand, because Thailand benefit out of the border. So imagine, now we talk everything about the scam center, and then everyone is so surprised in past few months ago. But these scam centers are there for how many years? More than 5 years. This is like discovery of ice in the 100 years of solitude, right? I mean, ice is always there, and suddenly you say, oh, I discover the ice. But, during that 5 years, a lot of people around the border get, benefit out of it. Imagine you just sell about, $1 per day for the food to the, about 30,000, 200,000 people across the border. That's nearly $500,000 money you're going to create it, right? So Thailand do not want to clearly coming in that part. And the third part is the most important one I thought, right? I mean, armed groups on the China-Myanmar border is more, how can I say, clear in command and structure. They have a very clearly chain of command, and then they are only 1 or 2% leadership. They can easily talk. But if you cross the Myawaddy and Mae South border, you're going to face at least 6 different armed groups right now. Everyone claims they are controlling the area, plus other different interest groups. And you got a series of PDF who is living in the KNU control area. KNU is so weak in the central command, so it's very difficult for Thailand to just simply put a pressure on the one pain point. This is a matter. And what become more interesting part is, because of the Stem Center issue, China is now started coming in the region that, okay, you need to focusing on, and then how you're going to deal with this kind of, armed groups in the border, how you're going to deal with these armed group in there, and why you're supporting and selling this kind of thing coming on. For Thailand, it's a very uncomfortable situation, because this is the first time that China come to their border and asking to the armed group that they consider always their proxy on the Myanmar side, right? So I think Thailand is a very difficult situation, and they focus on reopening to the AH1, Asia High 1. That is the only way that they can leverage on these groups. But I think central administration is not that really in a hurry into, because they want to make everything on the sea freight to control the imports and make it sure that these groups along the highway do not get the rent-seeking money out of it for surviving, right? So the role that Thailand got profit out of fragmentation is very different from China, and also the role that Thailand have a power to change something on the Myanmar side is also very limited too.
Thanks, Amara. Now, one last question. The influence of China in Myanmar is leading people to be kind of fatalistic about the autonomy of the fate of the nation, calling it a client state. There are arguments raging online between analysts. And obviously, China can now bully the Myanmar military very effectively. There's no question. But Min Aung Hlaing has been trying to get closer to Russia. There's been many trips back and forth. That's often interpreted as the Myanmar military hedging. Is that effective? Is the Russia connection giving the military anything that China can't? Or is this really just for show?
Just put in that way, right? I mean, Myanmar military historically fight against the Communist Party in the northern Burma. And then, they fight against the MNDAA in 2013, 14, and 15, So they always consider, and they have strong lies of the UWSA that in the eastern part. So they always consider, China is a kind of threat, but at the same time they need to working it on, because, this has now become larger neighbor. So they always find a way for hedging against it, right? Things in administration, they're looking the West, and the pushback from China is pretty hard coming out. So then NLD administration try to play around with that part. They have a very good relation in China. At the same time, they try to manage micromanaging through hedging on it is kind of successful. But now after the coup, a lot of Western countries disengage. So there is no other choice but to more rely on Russia and India. And this is somehow more like, you have no other choice to hedging against it, right? So I think, that will be going on. And of course, Russia and India may not able to financially inject like China, but at some point, for certain part, they can rely on certain strategic management, right? For example, the way seaport, they can easily contract it to the other country, but they try to put Russia as a first seaport in this kind of area in Southeast Asia. That's also creating a more hedging against one party, one country, influencing on it, and they also change the landscape in the regional setting. So I think this is more like a no choice scenario. So if there is another Western country re-engaging, there will be a lot more interesting part. But one of the most important and critical thing is, China is growing so fast. So in 2010 to 2015, China is not as powerful as right now. Now more than a decade after. So if we ask whether China may allow the central administration to engage like in 2010 to 2015, I am not sure that's going to be like an easy, track on it for the central administration. Because central administration is weaker and China is growing, and the Western countries have no interest in the Southeast Asia anymore, at least for next couple of years.
Yeah, it does seem that way, though there have been some recent mixed messages from the United States. Look, really appreciate you coming on the show, Amara, for the first time. It's been a great chat, and hopefully we can have you here again down the line. Looking forward to reading your future publications.
Thanks for that. Thank you very much.
That brings us to the end of this first fortnightly episode of What's Happening in Myanmar, episode number 63. Thanks for listening through to the end. Now that the show is every 2 weeks, if you have any suggestions for a new format or any feedback you'd like to give to the show, please email us, whimyanmar@proton.me. We love engaging with our audience. Okay, that's it. Farewell and take care.